This is about making sure that the next generation of Canadians and the generation after that have a tax system that creates opportunities for them and not unfair advantages for a small subset. We are out consulting with Canadians, and what I heard this morning was largely consistent. People do want to have a system that works for the long term. They want to have a system that encourages investment in small business. They don't want to have a system that creates inequities and gives advantage to some that aren't there to others.
It's quite something for a gazillionaire who married into money. Of course, he married into the billionaire McCain family. So he's a trust fund for generations, Bill Morneau, that's the finance minister, working with Justin Trudeau, who as well inherited his money from his father, Pierre Trudeau, who inherited from his father. It's quite something for two trust fund babies whose families will never have to work, to lecture small business people in the middle class about fairness and to hike taxes on the little people compared to them, and to say it's in the name of equity, and to do so while saying they are champions of the middle class. It is so gross. And joining us now to talk about it via Skype is our friend, Lorne Gunter, columnist for the Edmonton Sun newspapers. Lorne, it's great to see you again, by the way, Lorne. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
You wrote a piece in the Edmonton Sun called Tax Fairness. The Liberal small biz tax changes are the total opposite. And in a minute, let's get into the numbers, because you have some very interesting stats in your article. But these two men who got their wealth, and listen, you have the right to inherit money, sure. You have the right to be rich, sure.
Of course.
But for these two men who got their money through marriage or through inheritance, to lecture the small businessman, the farmer, the doctor, the startup on why it's only fair that they pay more taxes, and for them to accuse the small businessmen of being tax cheats by having little companies, that's the grossest part here, don't you think?
Absolutely. That's what bothers me about this more than anything else. And we can talk about numbers in a minute, and they're appalling. They really are. Like, it surprises me that the Liberals even think they can get away with this. But you heard there Morneau saying that, well, he'd been out that morning and he'd consulted with ordinary Canadians, and they had told him they want a tax system that's sustainable and doesn't create inequities for the very rich. Well, who is going to go to a focus group and say, no, I'm all in favor of non-sustainable tax systems that do favor the top? I think no one is going to. You go to a plenary session, and you ask somebody, are you in favor or opposed to a fair tax system? There's not going to be a single person in the room, no matter what their view of the tax system is, that will put up their hand in favor of an unfair tax system. So what the Liberals are doing is stacking the deck from the beginning to say, look, we've consulted with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Canadians, and they have all told us they want what we want, which is fairness. Well, okay, as a philosophy, that's fine. But what you're not asking them is, well, what do you think about the specifics of our plan? And that's what really bothers me, is this notion that everybody, engineers, shopkeepers, farmers, independent fishermen, the contractor who comes and redoes your kitchen cabinets when you're remodeling your house, lawyers, doctors, accountants, software designers, all of those people are, in the Liberals' minds, tax cheats.
Yeah.
Small manufacturers. I have a cousin who lives in a place called Swift Current, Saskatchewan, which is actually where Brad Wall, the retiring premier of Saskatchewan, is from. He owns a chainmail company, if you can actually believe that. He makes chainmail. He made all of the chainmail for the Lord of the Rings movies, and out of Swift Current, Saskatchewan. And he employs about 8 people, and he's exactly the kind of person who's going to get smashed by these small business tax increases. So Morneau can say that we're only going after the richest, the subset of small business people who are using their small businesses to evade taxes. But when you look at the numbers that they hope to get, they think that there's $27 billion out there that is under tax. Now, there is not a dollar in Canada that is under tax, because once you have the feds, the provinces, and the municipalities taking your money, you are fully taxed. So there isn't a dollar that's under tax, but they believe there's 27 billion out there, and they think that by closing these small business loopholes, as they call them, they can collect a substantial portion of that and help offset their overspending problem.
You know, I mean,
Because
there's
they
only
talk about, we have a deficit, the economy's too slow, it's not generating enough money to pay for our fantasies. They have an overspending problem. They don't have an under revenue problem. But there's one number I want people to remember, and that's 70%, because it applies in two ways in this. About 2/3 to 3/4 of all small business people in Canada, so around 70%, make under $80,000 a year. So that's 70% of all small business people in Canada make under $80,000 a year. They are decidedly middle class.
yeah,
They make what a new high school teacher makes in
Yeah.
a lot of jurisdictions, or a nurse,
yeah,
or a firefighter, or a police officer. That does not make them
Yeah.
wealthy. This
Yeah.
does not make them the rich, as Morneau and
Yeah.
Trudeau keep calling them. And the other reason I want you to remember the number 70 is that when Morneau and Trudeau are finished, if they get their way, the effective rate of taxation on what are called passive investments within small businesses. So when you use some of your revenue from the small business to buy another investment that has a lower tax rate than personal income would, the effective tax rate will be slightly over 70%. 70%, that will be the effective tax rate. And somehow Morneau and Trudeau think that's fair. That to them is the definition of fairness. It appalls me, because the implication is that all of these people who, during election campaigns, Liberals run around and say, oh, they're the core of our economy. They're the backbone of our community. Small business people are essential to Canada. They create most of the new jobs. All of that is true. But the proof is in the pudding. And in the pudding in this case is this 70 number,
Wow.
where they're going to ding people making under $80,000 a year with a 70% effective tax rate on some of their income, because they think they're cheap.
You know, I got so many things that pop into my mind. The first one is Donald Trump says he's going to cut taxes. Now, even if he does not, you know they're not going up. So the brain drain will continue, the capital drain will continue. Number two, you mentioned $27 billion. There's only 35 million Canadians, only fewer than half in the labor force. So that is that's almost $1,000 per man, woman, and child. As if we're undertaxed $1,000 per man, woman, and child in this country. And I'm thinking, they want to wring those last few pennies out of us. But these are the folks who hired 2 nannies for Justin Trudeau on the government dime, who spent $120,000 moving Gerald Butts down the highway from Toronto to Ottawa, who just hired a friend of the Liberal Party for more than $200,000 for a diplomatic post that was supposed to pay just over $100,000. They are wringing every penny and every $100,000 they can out for themselves. And then the last thing that comes to mind, I'm not just throwing these things at you, Lorne. Yesterday I did a show talking about how Gerald Butts is in love with this Marxist French economist called Thomas Piketty, who wrote this neo-communist book called Capital in the 21st Century. That is what's going on here. I don't throw the word communist around lightly. I don't use it as an insult. I use it as a description. And Gerald Butts believes in Marxism, and his 18 tweets about this book by Thomas Piketty suggest as much. When he and all his friends are getting $100,000 to move down the street, or 6-figure or 7-figure bonuses and gifts, when Bill Morneau marries a billionaire, when Justin Trudeau inherits tens of millions, they are millionaire socialists. It's so gross. Here's my question, Lorne. Is there going to be any pushback?
Limousine liberal, limousine socialist. I mean, it's exactly what's going on here. My understanding, the last time I looked in this, which was last year, Pierre Trudeau's former lawyers were still responsible for paying most of Justin Trudeau's personal expenses.
Yeah.
Out of the trust fund. These are people who have no connection to reality, and have let their heads be filled with claptrap about how small business people are really hosing all the rest of it. Would you like to work? Well, you do work 16, 18, 20 hours a day running your small business. That's exactly the kind of person that's going to get hit the hardest by all of this. And Morneau and Trudeau have tried to push this off that, well, it's just a bunch of rich lawyers and doctors and people who have investment funds and aren't doing any work for them. Rubbish. That's just utter horse droppings. Yeah. I can't remember anything that this government has done in the last 2 years that has incensed me more than the attitude around this. The numbers around it are appalling. The numbers around it are stupid. They show that they're completely out of touch, but it's the attitude more than anything else, this Butts attitude, where, you know, this French economist doesn't call himself a Marxist, but it's Marxism in a velvet glove. You remember that's the term they used to use in Czechoslovakia before the breakup with the Slovaks and before the Soviets were kicked out. It was communism in a velvet glove. Well, this is just Marxism in a velvet glove. It's the same thing. You can chart it up with a nicer number. But the thing is, there are a lot of people now. Used to be, of course, that most of us had a connection to a farm. So we understood where food came from. But when we broke that connection by moving to cities, we ended up not understanding where our meat comes from or our milk or our grains or any of that sort of stuff. And so we had dumb ideas about animal husbandry and animal rights and you know, GMOs and all sorts of crazy things like that. Well, I think the same has happened on the side of business. Is it used to be that we knew somebody in our family who was an entrepreneur, somebody who had a small insurance company, somebody who was a plumber and employed 2 other plumbers to go around doing repairs in people's houses, or somebody had a shop. Maybe we were born and raised above a corner store. We had that connection, so we understood how hard the work was for how little return, and we just instinctively didn't have to be told that tax changes like this were grotesque. Yeah. But now that so many people work for wages, particularly in the public sector, we have more than 4 million people in Canada now who have secure pensions, have secure jobs, have higher than average incomes because they work for a university, a hospital, a school board, a municipality, a provincial government, the federal government, an environmental organization, a crown corporation that's all funded by government. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many people who are doing that, the same way we lost touch with how our food is produced, we've lost touch with how our money is produced. Yeah. And so people just think, oh, Justin, that's such a great idea, because there are just so many rich people out there who are just hoarding their money that should be going to all of us to pay for free benefits, free tuition, free whatever. And there just is no political base anymore that gets agitated the way it should when Morneau and Trudeau come around with these tax hikes.
And I can't think of a single entrepreneur in the cabinet. Trudeau, of course, a trust fund boy. Morneau married a billionaire. Catherine McKenna of the Environment File, basically a lifelong activist and NGO lawyer. The energy minister himself, Jim Carr, he's an oboe player. That's what he did before he went into junior politics. You know, Miriam Monsef, Bardish Chagger, don't even get me joking. Yeah. I mean, they had like 1 year as in token private sector jobs. I cannot think of a single, Chrystia Freeland, sort of a dabbling journalist dilettante. No one in charge of any significant file has any business experience. Well, and I'm not going to give Morneau credit for marrying a billionaire. If we could all do that as a business experience, we would.
And he inherited a small business, human resources business, from his father, who'd run it for almost 50 years and then turned it over to Bill Morneau. Now, Morneau turned it from a couple of dozen employees into about 4,000 employees. It was a huge company when he left to go into politics. But he's even using that as an excuse. And Freeland, the foreign affairs minister, to the extent that she understands business, she's written books saying, well, income disparity is a huge social problem in our society now because rich people are stealing from all the rest of us. So she comes in with exactly the mentality that is behind these tax changes.
No wonder they hate Trump.
There's no one sitting around that cabinet table saying, excuse me, you know, I used to run a small business and I know how hard it is. We can't do this.
Yeah. Well, we're doomed, Lorne. That's unless there's some grassroots movement, maybe we'll put our shoulder to the wheel. Hopefully the Canadian Taxpayers Federation will get things going. I mean, I've seen Andrew Scheer of the Conservatives mention this. I hope that there's some spirit to fight back, but you know what? I don't even think it matters. I think Justin Trudeau and Gerald Butts are kamikazes on this one. We'll have to put our own efforts behind this, because this is going to hurt us as a company, but who cares about us? It's going to hurt millions of Canadians. Thanks for shining the light on.
I think this is just like their environment policy. They don't care what the facts are. They are so married to their ideological drive that nothing's going to stop them.
Yeah. Lorne Gunter, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us today.
You bet.
All right. Well, that is bad news. What can you say? It's the bad old days. It's like the 9 years of Stephen Harper were a rumor, and all of his economic and social conservative policies are being undone. It's only 2 years into the Trudeau regime. Hey, if you like that, sign up for my show every day. Click on the screen to subscribe.